and welcome to EduCurious. Today we have special guest with us, Nicole Sealey. And Nicole is a civics teacher at a middle school in our area, and she does phenomenal work behind the scenes. She's got great test scores, great student data, but also great relationships. So welcome to EduCurious, Nikki. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me.
Well, I admire you so much, and a lot of it is the teaching practices, but the underlying heart that you bring to education. So today, if you could, please talk about your educational journey and sort of what is that passion behind your practice and your vocation.
I always loved working with kids. I used to love to babysit, and I used to get very positive reviews from the families I would babysit for. And when I was in college, I thought to myself, I have a couple of classes where I just needed to take basically any class to just count as a credit. I had plenty for my major, and I took intro to education. And I was very interested in that. And I just honestly had just always loved hanging out with kids. I had it in the back of my mind. After college, I really wanted to travel. And so I took a job as a flight attendant and did that for 6 years because I couldn't afford to travel having just graduated from college. So I let them pay me to do it, and I had a blast. And I was also very good at managing tricky situations on the plane with passengers. And I know it might sound weird, but actually, there's tons of overlap in classroom management and trying to keep people like focused and happy on a plane when you've got delays and you're asking them to do things they don't want to do. And, they would much rather be where they're, headed to and not stuck here with you. And so listen, a plane full of adults going to Vegas has the same exact energy as a classroom full of eighth graders when it's seventh period and you really need them to focus. So I just decided after I had my son, I didn't want to travel and be away from him anymore. And it had always just been in the back of my mind ever since babysitting. And so that's when I applied. And my first couple of years were tricky, but I knew I loved it. I was trying to raise my toddler. I was pregnant with my daughter. I was doing the ACE program for the alternative certification, and I was doing my reading endorsement. And I was also new to teaching. It was a lot, but I also knew that it was exactly what I wanted to be doing.
What did you originally get your degree in or go to school for?
I double majored in political science and history. I knew in seventh grade that's what I wanted to study, and that's what I did.
So, with your traveling, those experiences, knowing that there's a world bigger than the one that you came from, how do you incorporate that in your teaching methods?
I would like to say, by the way, that anytime anyone can take a child anywhere they've never been before, please, please do it. I don't care if it's Duluth. I, I don't care where it is. There's so much to the travel experience that's so important for kids. And it's not just about where you're going, it's everything. Um, Honestly, if it was up to me, our kids would be getting so many more real world applications in our classroom. Everything from public transportation, how to get to the airport and know what to do and where to go and where you can go find information about what you can pack and what you can't pack. That's the kind of stuff that empowers them to a level that is hard to describe. Um, I actually do the EF tours trips because I feel like it's important for the kids to travel, and watching the confidence level in the kids from when we left Orlando to go on the trip versus when we came back was crazy. Because after that week in a different country, after navigating the tube in London and all of the experiences that came with that, there was a physical difference in how they carried themselves when they got back. And one of the students that I had had the year prior to the trip the difference in her when she came back. It was crazy to see in the best way possible. Um, in my classroom, I will definitely, with some things, if I'm able to pull in pictures of me on trips to certain places, if it's going to help them become more interested in something, just looking at the pictures of like, how old were you here and all that. But then you actually get them engaged in where am I? What are we talking about? What were we doing? I cannot stress enough to the kids. I talk to them about um, your paradigm and your point of view. At the beginning of the year, and this overlaps with my civics a lot as well, there are a series of lessons I do that are intended to help the kids connect with each other. Everybody does icebreakers at the beginning of the year, but I'm not talking about regular icebreakers, which drive the kids crazy. Um, we do a series of lessons in which I explicitly teach Maslow's hierarchy, and then a few things I've created to build on that. And there's a vocabulary activity that we do that is actually amazing, amazing to teach the kids for social emotional learning, as well as building connections between the kids in the classroom so that the classroom feels safer. And we actually pull different points of view based on life experiences in with that lesson in a really engaging way. And for me, travel is part of that. So when I do the introductions to myself, I'll show the picture of me when I was a flight attendant, or I'll show pictures of trips that I've gone on and stuff like that. And we will discuss the difference between watching somebody travel on TV versus actually being in that place and the experience of being immersed in it and how that's going to change your perspective. I tie that into your ability to learn, and I talk about how you should never turn down an opportunity to learn, because if I need you to understand what it's like to be in the mountains for the purpose of a lesson, right? And this would tie in with your reading teachers as well. If I need you to understand what it's like trying to survive in the mountains and you've never been outside of Polk County, you're going to struggle with the context of what you're learning about, right? But if your family's gone on vacation to North Georgia and you've been in the mountains, if you've been in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the kids immediately know what I'm talking about. And a lot of these kids have been to North Georgia. So they understand the difference between looking at a picture of the mountains and actually being there, right? And so we tie all that into differing perspectives and how you need to be curious, not critical at all points in time in my classroom. Um, because someone might have a different point of view than yours. But instead of being critical and just being like, well, that's dumb and I'm right and you're wrong, you need to be curious about what they've experienced in their life that's taken them to that place, that's gotten them to that opinion. And travel and your life experiences and the differences in those life experiences ties into that.
So with the curious, not critical, which I think is such a great way to summarize your educational philosophy, I notice you do a lot of very intentional, culturally responsive lessons and teaching within the full year that you're in the classroom. So specifically, talk to me about culturally responsive teaching and how that really gets to the kids and opens up doors for learning, higher order thinking, that whole thing.
But it starts with one word. It's got boxes and it's like a diamond shape. And it starts with one word at the top of the page. And under that box are two boxes. So the only thing you're asking the kids to do to begin with is I'm going to give you a word to put in that first box. And then I want you, the very first two words that come to mind when I say that word, go in those next two boxes. Don't overthink it, just the first two words that come to mind. Okay. Then you put those two words in those boxes. Then you look at the first word you said in there and you go, okay, what are the first two words that come to mind when I see this word? And you put those under that. And you can continue doing this. So that's why it builds out in the pyramid or a diamond shape, is for each word, you're giving me the first two words that you think of when you get that word. Then when you get to the halfway point, now you have to try and synthesize these words. And so the two words you're looking at, what's one word that connects them? What's one word that connects these two words? And you start bringing it back down to one word again. And this is amazing as a vocabulary activity. A lot of times, if you are not an experienced teacher, or even if you are, um, you are creating lessons from your background knowledge, right? And as I get older, my background knowledge has less and less in common with the children. And also, I need to make sure that when I'm trying to give examples to help them understand abstract concepts, if I'm trying to make it concrete, it has to be in a concrete way with their world, right? Not mine. And so the thing with the vocabulary, and this is why I love this for accommodation as well as for social emotional. If I start you with the same word and everyone in class, and at the beginning of the year, we play with this, right? We do fun words with it. So we'll start with a word like summer. And then I ask you, what are the first two words that come to your mind when you think of summer? It's got a couple simple rules. No proper nouns. You can't repeat a word or use part of a word in another word. Um, so for me, summer, the first two words that might come to my mind would be swimming and reading, right? Okay. For another kid in class, they're going to have completely, every kid in class is going to have different words. And even if they do have swimming as one of their words, under swimming, when it's time for me to think of the first two words that swimming brings to mind, right? I might say lake because I grew up on a lake, right? Whereas another kid might say pool because they grew up going to their cousin's pool or going to the Y pool. Or they might put ocean because they grew up going to the beach. So everyone starts with the same word, and at the end of this activity, no one has the same word. No one has the same ending word. And so this does several things. For my kids that are low-level readers, they're choosing all of the adjectives and nouns that go in this. So they get to use their own vocabulary. Okay. It's the beginning of the year. I need everybody to feel safe and comfortable in my classroom. So if you have high level vocab, you're picking the words for this. You can use your high level vocab. If you are if you have a lower reading level, you're still picking words that you are comfortable with. If you're one of my left-brained babies that want everything to make sense and be in a nice ordered checklist, this whole thing is going to be synonyms and antonyms, and they're going to be happy because every connection is going to make perfect sense. If you're one of my right-brained creative babies that like colors on everything and never wears matching socks and always wants to say the most hilarious off-topic things in class. The connections that you make in this diamond are going to be fantastic and hilarious. And I love it because all I have to do is point to it and say, okay, how did you get from swimming to owl? And they'll be like, okay, so funny story. And then they'll tell you a story and they will give you exactly why they got from swimming to owl. And it will make sense to them, and that's all that matters, right? So at the end of the activity, we've all started with the word summer. And then I just go around the room and I have everybody tell me what their final word was, their closing word at the end of this graphic organizer. And we see how everyone started from the exact same place, but we all ended up somewhere different, right? And they will be cracking up laughing at some of the words these kids ended their graphic organizer with because it's so far away from where we started. And it opens up this great conversation about how none of these are wrong. If you can explain how you got from here to here, that's all I asked for, right? So, but we all started in the same place. None of these are wrong, and yet they're all different, right? And my kids are able to fill this out in the way that makes them happy. So my creative babies have a creative outlet and they're so excited to have really random things in here. And like I said, my left brain babies, it all makes sense. It's very ordered. Um, and everyone appreciates it. Everyone's having a good time. Everyone's laughing at some of the connections. There's plenty of opportunities for identifying with what other people put because we'll just call on random people and I'll be like, okay, so what did you put for your two words for this? but it's such a good opportunity to have great discussions at the beginning of the year about how we need to be curious, not critical, and also how we could have all ended up, we all started in the same place, we all ended up in completely different places, but that doesn't make any of the final words wrong. They're just different. And everyone gets that message. Everyone walks away from that going, yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. And because they're laughing as we hear how different the words are, it's and also with some of our kids, for example, every year I have a student or two that is Hindu or Islamic or whatever. And as a teacher, you have to be so careful about supporting them without necessarily putting them under a magnifying glass in your attempt to show your support for them in class, right? You don't want to call them out and be like, "Hey, your family's Muslim, aren't they?" And put them in a situation where they may not want the attention. So this is a great way at the beginning of the year to make the kids explicitly aware of how many different opinions and experiences are sitting in that classroom without delving into not socioeconomic status or anything else that might make some of the kids feel uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
They're able to share what they feel comfortable with. No answers wrong. And it's collaborative too. So it does, it really creates a safe space within your classroom, which is part of being culturally responsive and not just saying, oh, I'm sure you're all like me because we're all from this little town of like Wales. It's like, but are we?
And the whole thing is, um, you can you can acknowledge how different everyone's lives are outside of the classroom without it, like you're kind of alluding to socioeconomic differences or cultural differences, um, without it being overtly about that. So, for example, if I'm pointing out when I say swim, some of you are going to, and some of the kids don't want to swim. So if I say swim, the first thing that comes to their mind is no, right? Um, some of them might think, I mean, I had one kid say drown. He's like, I don't like going to the beach. I'm always afraid I'm gonna drown. I was like, there's nothing wrong with that, honey. If that's your word, put it down, right? And so right out of the gate, I am teaching them a vocabulary activity because we're going to use it with actual vocab words periodically throughout the rest of the year. But oh, okay, so here's a big piece of advice I have for teachers that I think everybody overlooks. You have to teach, when you're teaching the kids something new, you must always either teach new content with a strategy they are already comfortable with, or you must teach a new strategy or method with content they're already comfortable with. Your kids are going to struggle and you are going to get frustrated if you are trying to teach new content and new method. So, for example, if I'm teaching them new vocabulary words, it has to be with a method I've already practiced, like with this graphic organizer. We started with the word summer, and then we're going to use the word like school, and then we're going to use the word friend, and we're going to do that graphic organizer 4 times together. And then I'm going to give you 2 other words to do it with on your own, and we're going to have a blast, right? But it's all words everyone in this room is comfortable with and everyone has the context for. And then when I pull this graphic organizer back out for you to do your vocabulary with, it's only new content. It's not a new strategy. You are comfortable with the strategy because we used this activity with other stuff you were familiar with. And I feel like a lot of teachers stumble when they're trying to teach a new graphic organizer and new information to put in that new graphic organizer, or a new writing skill and new content to read. It should be new content or a new skill, but not both. You got to leave one of them familiar. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense because when I switched careers, I wanted to teach off of a PowerPoint because I came from the business world. And I was like, I can't do anything other than like something familiar with all this new stuff. And then I got better
Exactly.
and I didn't need it. But at first, yes, it was like my little comfort blanket.
And that's just it with the kids. If you want them to focus on the new math, you have to be doing methodology that they are all 100% comfortable with. And then once they understand the new math, now you can give it to them in a new activity. So when you think about your lessons being layered and you think about like introduction level to a lesson, when you think about basics like recall versus compare and contrast versus creating something new with this is a good thing to help you think about that. I'm going to start with an activity they know cold to introduce this new information. Then, once I'm sure that they really have a good grasp on the new information, now we're going to up it by adding a new activity, which will keep them interested and engaged. But you can't do both. You cannot do both at the same time. Their brain has to be free to focus on the new component. So, new content with a familiar strategy or new strategy or activity with content they're familiar with. Yeah, so at the beginning of the year, when you're teaching them the stuff you use in your classroom, you can be doing it with their lives because they're familiar with their lives, like I do with the vocab. And that comes across as much more constructive than just generic icebreaker after generic icebreaker, which drives them crazy.
You mentioned the Maslow's hierarchy as a foundation and how you structure your class, especially at the beginning of the year. Can you dive into that?
Yes. So I explicitly teach Maslow's. This ties into my expectations for them in the classroom. This ties into classroom management and how I understand that we have a lot of things going on. And so you and I need to proactively come up with some things we can do. Um, to help with tricky situations. Um, we talk about things like you can be angry, but you can't be rude. Let's talk about how that impacts other people. It helps with buy-in because I need them to understand that their choices don't just impact them, it impacts everybody in the room and everyone's ability to learn. It builds empathy. I need them to understand that I recognize that a lot of them have a lot of crap going on outside the classroom that plays a much bigger role in how they feel about things than my vocabulary lesson for the day, right? My vocabulary lesson is not even going to show up on their radar with some of the stuff they have dealing with outside of school. And I need them to know that I recognize that, right? Because they don't care about your lesson if you don't care about them. Um, I also use this for goal setting purposes. And for my kids that have IEPs or struggle with learning in a traditional classroom, I want them to know straight out of the gate that if you have stuff going on in your life that's interfering with your ability to be at the top of the pyramid, then if you're struggling to learn, that's not because there's something wrong with you. That's because you have stuff in your life that's keeping you on a lower level of the pyramid. So please don't take it personally. Please don't feel like you're not enough of something. Please don't feel like there's something wrong with you. Situationally, you're in a position, right, where you're on a different level of the pyramid. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. That means where you're at right now has certain conditions, and you just have to, we have to get you to a place where we can meet those conditions so that you can move back up again. So I'm really trying to connect with them in a way that's meaningful and not just sit in front of them and be like, I really care about you and I want all of you to have a wonderful year. And these lessons will help you with the rest of your life. So please pay attention. That's not what I'm going for. Like, we're going to get real with this, right? Um, it also helps because I used to teach science and I used to teach brain science to my eighth graders at the beginning of the year because they need to know what's happening in their brain during adolescence and puberty and how that impacts them and their thinking. For example, your brain is reacting chemically, hormonally at 10 times the level of a fully developed adult brain. So we talk about Maslow's and how you and your parents might be struggling right now because your mom thinks you overreact to everything and you think your mom underreacts to everything and she's not taking it seriously enough. So I'm explaining to them about their brains and how your brain is reacting to the hormonal signals your brain is giving you. Your mom's brain is reacting to the signals she's getting 1/10 of the input that you are hormonally over this situation, right? But we also talk about your toolkit and what's in your toolkit and how the more tools you have in your toolkit, the faster you're able to get back up those rungs of the Maslow ladder again after something knocks you down. And so I'll say, okay, let's say you guys are in a car accident, right? Um, your brain is giving you a hormonal response at 10 times the level of your mom's, right? It's not a serious car accident. It's a fender bender, but it can still be extremely scary, right? Um, And we will just talk about the hormone component, Maslow's. If your mom's been through more stuff and she's been an offender bender before, or your mom understands what to do in this situation, she has a mental checklist. I need to take pictures. I need to call the insurance. I need to call the police. I need to fill out this report. You don't know any of that. You haven't been through this before. So you don't feel as in control of the situation as she does, right? And we talk about how feeling like you have control over things also helps with Maslow's and where you're at. And how I know this is a difficult age because it feels like you have so little control and other people tell you what you have to do with your time and all of that. And so I'm able to build a real connection with them where we're having real talk, but I'm structuring it around Maslow's. I'm structuring it around the tools in your toolkit and why learning is so important, even if you don't understand how this connects to your world. Because one thing I tell my kids every year at the beginning of the year, and then I beat it into their brains all year long, lovingly. Um, I say, knowledge is power, which you've all heard. And they're all like, yeah. I'm like, but here's the part Miss Seeley adds to it that nobody else adds. Knowledge is power. For the rest of your life, you will be at the mercy of anyone that knows more than you. And then they look at me and they're like, what? And I say, for the rest of your life, you will be at the mercy of anyone that knows more than you. That goes for every facet of your life. That goes for work, right? That goes for romantic relationships. That goes for getting your car fixed. That goes for the guy that's gonna put a roof on your house. If you go to get your car fixed and you know nothing about cars, it could be a $10 part that will take 5 minutes to fix. But if they can convince you it's a $700 repair, you will pay it. You are at their mercy because they know more than you. If you go up to the high school as a freshman and some senior is showing interest in you, there's a reason that senior is going after the new kids on the block, right? That don't know anything, that don't know anything about that person or whatever. And we talk about how in relationships, if they know more than you, if they are more experienced in relationships than you are at their mercy. And I have a very real conversation about this. I'm like, you are at the mercy of anyone that knows more than you for the rest of your life. So I don't care if you don't understand how information relates to your world. Never turn down an opportunity to learn. Never turn down an opportunity to learn. You will be at the mercy of anyone that knows more than you. I said, so your goal is always to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. Notice I didn't say the smartest, the most knowledgeable, right? You can always be hustling on your knowledge level. Now, if you are the most knowledgeable person in the room, you have a responsibility to use that responsibly, right? So then I tie that back to them and I go, how many of you have younger brothers or sisters? And a lot of hands go up. I go, how many of you have ever messed with them because you were older and so it was easy for you to do? Oh yeah, absolutely, right? And then I tell them a story about when I messed with my younger sister because she was 4.5 years younger than me. And she came in asking what humidity was. And I said, it's the amount of moisture in the air. And so she said, so what happens when the humidity gets to 100? And I could have said it rains, but did I? No. I said, all the air in the atmosphere turns to water and we drowned. And her eyes got so big and she looks at me and she said, but the humidity, the guy on the news, the weather guy said the humidity was 97%. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, that's only 3%. I'm like, I know. She goes, what do we do? I said, well, she goes, I said, go check and make sure all the windows are closed and locked, and I'll make sure the doors are locked. And that way, if all the air outside turns to water, we still have the air in the house that we can breathe. And she's like, okay, okay, freaking out because she believed me. And I tell that story to my students because they get a kick out of it. They identify with it. right? That is exactly the kind of thing they're like, that's hilarious, right? But then we talk about how I was able to mess with my sister because I was more knowledgeable than her, right? And so it brings the lesson home in a way they understand. And then all year long, every time it's relevant, I will point back to that comment. In world history, especially, we look at how many times wars are won or lost because of knowledge one side had that the other didn't. Like with the Hittites and everything in Mesopotamia. And I had kids in world history going, knowledge is power. And I was like, you got it, because they had iron and everybody else was still working with bronze, and you don't stand a chance if they are over there with iron weapons and you only have bronze. And so you can keep calling back to that all year long, right? And that's why I said it's important to learn about other cultures as well. And that's why it's important to be curious, not critical. If you're curious, you'll learn why. If you're critical, you learn nothing. So I'm tying in curious, not critical with the whole knowledge is power. And the more you learn, the less vulnerable you are.
You take the time to get to know the students, meet them where they're at, make it relevant, and then you stay with them along the way. You very, very rarely, if any, ever have to send a kid out of your classroom for behavior disruptions. And we
I
know
don't
we have behavior disruptions because all of the stuff going on with hormones and brain chemistry. But I want to hear a little bit about how you handle some of the behaviors that are all over the place within this age group.
So when we do the social emotional stuff at the beginning of the year, like with Maslow's and stuff, one of the things I talk about is recognizing that sometimes you have things going on outside of class that you can't control. So after we do Maslow's, we do sphere of influence. So we draw basically what looks like a target. We've got the big circle, we've got the smaller circle in the middle, and we discuss sphere of influence and the things you do have power over versus the things that you do not. So we talk about if your parents are getting divorced, do you have any control over that? No. So we're going to put it in the big circle because that's outside of your sphere of influence. Um, we will talk about the things that you do have control over in response to your parents' divorce, right? We talk about how you have control over your reaction to things, even if you don't have control over someone else's behaviors and what they say, which then I circle back to, right? Like you can be angry, you can't be rude. Those are two different things. And you have every right to be angry, but you don't have the right to be rude to other people. And one of the things I'll tell the kids is, all right, let's talk about this. So stuff goes wonky outside of school, and so you don't have my homework done. If you have reached out to me prior to class, whether it's a message in Schoology, whether it's an email, whether it's through the messaging app, whether it's a sticky note on my door at the beginning of the school day, whatever it is, if you have made an attempt to proactively contact me ahead of time about whatever happened, right? I'm always going to work with you. If you just show up to class and you're like, yeah, about that, I don't have it done because fill in the blank. Then no, I'm not gonna tough, right? Because I totally get that your brother might have broken his leg at practice and you were in the emergency room at the hospital till 2 in the morning. Um, but you have me fifth period, right? So you had opportunities to say something before class. And I connect that back to real world skills and employment. Like if you're broken down on the side of the road because you have a clunker car and you're not going to make it on time for your shift, you don't just not show up for the shift. You, at the earliest possible moment, contact your boss and let them know, that kind of thing. And so we just discuss real world and the difference between what you don't have control over and what you do, and how you're responsible for what you do have control over. And we have to work really hard, and it's very difficult to grapple with the things we don't have control over because it's so frustrating and sometimes terrifying. But we're going to have to practice letting it go, and that it's not easy, and that as adults you'll still struggle with it, but with practice it will get easier to say, okay, I want to spend all of my time and all of my mental energy worrying about why I think my friend might be mad at me, but I'm not sure, right? Do you have control over how your friend feels? No. What do you have control over? So we're going to do what we can because that we're responsible for. And it's going to be really hard and we're not always going to be successful, but we are going to practice letting go of the things we don't have control over. And um, so that's a good conversation to have proactively at the beginning of the year, at the very beginning of the year. And then I tell them, if you're having a really rough day, if stuff is happening outside of class and it's going to impact you, we talk about Maslow's, right? If you're here because something's happening and I need you up here for class, you need to be proactive about telling me it. If you show up to my door and you say, Miss Seeley, I'm having a really bad day. I said, you don't have to give me, I'm not asking to pry, but you come to me and you say, I'm having a really difficult day today. I said, I will know you and I can even talk about what does this mean? Does this mean I don't call on you? Right? Does this mean I don't ask you to read anything out loud or I don't ask you to just give what you put on your paper? Does this mean I let you work by yourself instead of in a group because you're just over humans right now, which I totally get. Um, but you need to be proactive. Again, what you can control versus what you can't. If you just come in my room and you're on a tear and you're mad, so you want to be able to say whatever you want to say, that's not going to fly. But if you're coming to my room and you're letting me know, I got a lot going on right now, I will absolutely work with you. I will 100% work with you, right? So if you feel comfortable proactively doing that with me, we can kind of solve some stuff right there. Also, the kids coming to me knowing that I'm genuinely concerned about them, right? Which makes a difference as well. Um, it's easy to read the kids that need to be the center of attention. And so I always try to have things built into the lessons that are going to give kids that need attention the opportunity to do so constructively. For example, the warm-ups we do at the beginning of class, like the bell work activity. At the beginning of the year, I start by leading them through that. And then I start letting the kids take over and I walk them through the process of what to ask and how to respond to the other students. And then after they've done it a couple times, they're aces. Right? They are aces. So I just hand them bucks and I go, you're in charge. With great power comes great responsibility. And they will lead the whole class, and your clowns will make it funny, but they will usually do the right thing because they don't want to lose the chance to keep doing that. Right? So I've got a couple of guys, one in particular, who'll always be like, interesting. Tell me more. Or he'll be like, oh, is that what it actually says on your paper? Because he's messing with his friends. But they're doing the right thing. And so they're leading the class through the warm up. The kids are engaged because they're having fun. So if a kid needs attention, build it into the way you run your classroom, ways for them to get that attention that works with you, not against you. Um, the other thing is choices and agency. They need as much agency as possible. The more agency you give them, the more choices you provide them, the more you're going to get that buy-in. So I always try and give them as many choices as possible. And I tell them at the beginning of the year, again, explicitly, I go, I'm going to give you choices every chance I get. What I need you to understand is when we get to something where I haven't given you a choice, please respect that and know it's for a reason, right? You see me giving you choices. Do you want to do this activity or do you want to do it this activity? Would you guys rather do it this way or would you rather this way? Let's vote on it. Do you want to do this in small group or do you want to do this independently? I give them choices at least once per class, usually more. It's always manageable choices. I'm still going to get what I want out of them. But the more opportunity you give them for participating in their own learning process and making decisions about what they do, the more engaged they will be and the less they'll push back. And if they do, you can look at them and go, this is what you voted for, right? Or this is what you asked for. This is what you chose. So now we're going to use that choice. So then you're putting it back on them again.
So it's being culturally responsive in your environment within a classroom of these different types of learners, personalities, and that takes you paying attention to that. But also, I love that you are giving them opportunity to buy into their education, and that makes usually a mental attitude shift for the positive. So that's super great advice. I want to talk a little bit about some of your data. You have extremely high test scores within the end of your tests. And it's not just by chance, it's very intentional, but it also ties into, I feel like you work hard for the kids, you build trust, they work hard for you, they're able to perform. Can you walk us through that bit?
I'm big on kinesthetic learning. I'm big on any multisensory activities. So I always try to keep that in mind as well. Um, we'll do call and response. I have hand signals I've made for some things. The civil rights amendments can be tricky for them to remember. So I took the number of the amendment and I invented a picture for each one where the number is embedded in the picture. So we draw the pictures together when we do our notes and I introduce the civil rights amendments. And then the pictures really help them with that. I build in kinesthetic learning as much as possible. It might be that they're getting up. Um, I was doing one the other day for a class that I'm taking where I was working on main idea because I'm renewing my reading endorsement. So it's technically not from my classroom, but it is something I was working on where basically I had taken an article and I had turned the entire thing into sentence strips. And so you could ball up the sentence strip and there would be a main idea basket. And if that sentence strip related directly to main idea, you could toss it in the basket, try and make it in the basket. But if it was an extraneous detail, you could just throw it wherever you wanted on the floor. And because we don't need it, right? So every kid is immediately going to be engaged because they get to throw stuff on the floor, they get to try and make baskets because they all think that they're LeBron. And but just stuff like that. Also, I'll tell you this, as a former reading teacher, um, if you think of it in this way, when you get to middle school, writing is almost like a second language to these kids. Their entire life through elementary school, their primary form of communication has been verbal, oral communication, right? So getting them now to be able to write coherently is almost like a second language, right? Their brain is used to responding orally. I don't think enough teachers give them a chance to become proficient at the information verbally before expecting them to be able to write about it coherently. So when we start a new standard, we start with story time with Miss Sealey. And if they want to sit crisscross applesauce, they can. And I have some kind of story that connects in some way to the standard that we're doing, right? That's for civics. I don't do that in world history, but I do it in civics. And so what happens is the first time I'm introducing them to the content is with story time. And I'll usually have some way of trying to make it more interesting for them. And then at the end of story time, I know by discussing it, like through our discussion, whether they get the main idea I wanted them to walk away with from that story time, right? So that's how they're getting introduced to their standard. Before I ever ask them to read a single dadgum thing about their standard, we've had story time about the standard. And that's key, right? Then I explicitly teach 10 vocabulary words per standard. I pick out the 10 words that are most important. Civics is very heavily vocabulary based. You've got a lot of political terminology that they need to understand. Some of my babies are going to struggle with comprehension. Some of my babies are going to struggle with 18th century quotes because a lot of adults struggle with 18th century quotes, right? No shade. It's a very different way of speaking and writing. If we've had a stress-free conversation about our main topic for this week, first and foremost. And then I'm explicitly going over 10 keywords that you need for this week. And I make them flashcards. So it's got the word on one side and it's got definition and a picture on the other side. And they get those at the beginning of every week or every standard. Um, so you've already got flashcards for 10 keywords, and we've had a conversation. And now we're focusing on just these 10 words. Now we're going to start to read text about it, right? Um, I'm not throwing you in and asking you to read a text about something we've never spoken of, because if we've never spoken of it, you're going to sit here pretending that you know what you're reading, or you're just going to check out completely. But if I have a meaningful conversation with you about it first, and all you have to do is listen, right? And understand it verbally, just the basics. That's step one right out of the gate. Step two, key vocabulary terms. If I'm sure you're now familiar with these 10 words and can use these 10 words and recognize them, now we're going to look at reading about this content. And I think that that's something that gets overlooked by teachers that haven't taught reading.
So to close out this particular part, I kind of want to hear about where you see your career going in the next 5 years. Are you wanting to get 10 more endorsements, another degree, move up, move out? Like, what is your learning pathway? Because you're a lifelong learner. You're not just a teacher or an educator, but this is your whole world. You never put a book down.
Yeah, the kids are kind of just the excuse to keep learning. I'm just kidding. I mean, kind of, sort of. Um, I I definitely want to start on my doctorate. I cannot see myself in a world where I don't get to interact with kids. I don't want anything to do with admin or leadership. I don't. I want to be with the kids. I want to be in the classroom getting excited about this. Like, I can't wait to tell you about this. I love curriculum. I love creating new things. So that's kind of where I want to head with this. I would love the opportunity to make more curriculum, to design more stuff, that's child and teacher friendly. Um, and I want to keep learning. I definitely want to keep learning. But my master's, like, you have to understand, I did not go for an ed leadership master's. My master's is in my content area. It's in history. Um, and so I think for the doctorate, I want to look at curriculum, for my doctorate. I think that's the way I want to go. I don't know exactly where I want to be in 5 years. For me, it's more about goal setting for me and building my skills. And I don't presume to know where that is going to take me because the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. So I, yeah, I'm working on skill building for me, and then we'll see what happens.
So, thank you for being with us today on EduCurious. You have a wealth of knowledge and lived experiences, lots of things to try, and lots of things that you've learned along the way. So, thanks for sharing.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm sorry. I feel like my answers weren't necessarily what you wanted or what you were going for, that I might have wandered way off topic.
So, whether you're a teacher, a parent, or just EduCurious, join the community as we explore various educational topics and learn from each other. We will see you next time.